Assalamu alaikum everyone, how are you? I hope you're having a good time. My name is Dr. Ahmad Abdul Wahab, and inshallah today we will continue talking about adjective phrases and clauses. Now, if you didn't watch our previous video, the video in which we explained what adjective clauses and phrases are, I really recommend that you watch it first. You will find the link mentioned in the video above. Now, we will continue our lesson by talking about the positioning of adjective phrases and clauses. Now, what this means is, as you might remember from last time, we talked about there are three types of adjective phrases and clauses. Okay, I'm just going to use C for clauses and P for phrases. And let's have a quick recap or a quick review on what they were. So first, we had the prepositional phrase, which started with a preposition. Okay, which was simply a preposition and the object of the preposition and whatever is linked to them. Okay, we also talked about the participial phrase. And which usually begins with a participle and what follows it. And if you don't know what participles are, we also have a video talking about them that I really recommend that you watch. You will find the link above. And the third group, we had what we called the relative clauses, or what I like to call the who, which, that clause. Right? These were the three types of adjective phrases and clauses that we took in the previous video. Now, the positioning lesson is very simple. In all the examples that we mentioned previously, the adjective phrase was always placed in the middle of the sentence. However, that does not always have to be the case. Okay? So, the adjective phrase can either be in the middle of the sentence, usually following the noun that it describes. This structure is similar to the examples that we took in the previous video. However, it doesn't have to be in this case. We can also write the adjective phrase at the beginning of the sentence. Okay? However, there are two rules if we do that. Rule number one is that after it, or after the adjective phrase, we must put a comma. Okay? That's rule number one. Now, rule number two is that the noun that the adjective phrase describes must follow the noun. Must follow the comma, okay? The noun, the adjective phrase describes or talks about must follow the comma. Okay? Now, let's take some examples. Let's say, for example, having practiced all his life, now as you can see, this is an example of a participial phrase at the beginning of the sentence. We have the participle here, the present participle, and it is followed by a comma. Now remember, the noun that we're talking about must come after the comma. So ask yourself, who has practiced all his life? Now let's continue the sentence. Ahmed was more than ready. So as you can see in this example, this participial phrase, okay, which like we said, or like we mentioned here, is composed of a participle and what follows it, is used to describe Ahmed. Who has practiced all his life? Ahmed practiced all his life. Okay? So this is an example of a participial phrase at the beginning of the sentence. Now let's try the same idea with a prepositional phrase. Like many of his friends, Ahmed practiced every day. Now, like here is a preposition, okay? So we have a preposition at the beginning of the sentence, and the rule is applied here. As you can see, we put a comma after our preposition, or after our prepositional phrase. Now, who is like many of his friends? Ahmed is. So you can see that we put the noun we are talking about, the noun we are describing, after the comma, which is rule number 2. Similarly, sometimes the adjective phrase will come at the end of the sentence. Okay? Now, there is something important that I want you to know. In case this adjective phrase is a participial phrase, we have 2 scenarios. If the noun that the participial phrase modifies is directly before it, we do not use a comma. So we do not use a comma if the noun is directly before the participial phrase. Okay? However, if the noun the participial phrase modifies or describes is away from it, and we have the participial phrase at the end of the sentence, then we precede it by a comma. Now, this rule is important because when we consider participial phrases, it's actually the opposite of at the beginning of the sentence. So at the beginning of the sentence, usually we have the phrase and directly after it the noun it modifies, after the comma. But at the end of the sentence, especially in participial phrases, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, if the noun directly precedes it, we do not have a comma. Okay? However, if the noun it modifies is far from the phrase, then we use a comma. Let's take an example. Let's say, for example, she enjoyed petting the dog wagging its tail. In this example, wagging is a present participle describing the dog. So wagging its tail is my participial phrase. Now, since the participial phrase came directly after the noun it modifies in this case being the dog, then we do not use a comma, okay? We didn't use a comma. Why? Since the noun it modifies is directly before it. Okay, now let's take an example on the opposite case. Cooper enjoyed dinner at my house. Agreeing to a large piece of cherry pie, even though he was full. As you can see in this example, agreeing here is a participle, and this part of the sentence is a participial phrase. This participial phrase is describing Cooper. Who agreed to a large piece of cherry pie? Cooper did. Now, as you can see in the sentence, the noun is far away from the participle, and therefore we use the comma. So to sum up, if the noun is close to the participle, we do not use a comma. However, if the noun is away or far from the phrase, we use a comma. Okay? Now, when ending the sentence with a relative clause, or like we called it previously, a who, which, that clause, we usually precede it with a comma. Okay? So unlike the participial phrases at the end of the sentence, we don't have several scenarios here. We simply put a comma. Okay? So as an example, I enjoyed drinking this juice, comma, which is one of the tastiest things I've tried. Okay, so when putting it at the end of the sentence, we simply use a comma before it. So here's which, here's my relative pronoun. So we simply put a comma before it, and usually the noun it modifies is directly before the comma. Okay? This is in the case of a relative pronoun and relative clause, and the same usually applies to participial phrases at the end of the sentence. So this applies to both relative clauses and prepositional phrases. Okay? These are all the rules you must know about the positioning of adjective clauses and phrases. So they can be either at the beginning of the sentence, in the middle, like the examples we took previously, or in the tail of the sentence, or in the end of the sentence. Thank you for your time.